Hello and welcome to this Examine Chess video. Today we're looking at a game from Philidor's book that he published in 1749, which has been called Pawns Towards the Center. And this is a Philidor defense opening, and specifically the Lopez counter gambit. Exactly when this game was played is unknown, to me at the very least. As I mentioned, this was simply a game from his book, which was called, I believe, Analyze Chess Games. However, this was in French, I believe, so yeah. At the very least, we are looking at this game. The game starts out with e4, e5, knight to f3, and d6, and this is what is called the Philidor defense. Sorry. White decided to continue with bishop to c4, and we have f5, and this is what is called the Lopez counter gambit. Idea behind this move is that black is trying to eliminate this king's pawn, or the e-pawn rather, and trying to get this off of the center and recapturing with the bishop, leaving him with a central pawn duo against white's single pawn in the center. The game continues with d3, sorry. c6 was played, and this has an idea of whenever white takes this pawn, he's going to advance in the center at some point. After c6, white did decide to take this pawn with e takes f5 and bishop takes f5, developing the bishop. And also we can see that black now has the intended pawn duo in the center against white's single pawn. The game continues with bishop to g5, and instead of moving the queen, Philidor decided to play knight to f6. And the reason why is that he really wants white to capture this knight in order to get his pawn towards the center, and thus allowing him to build an even stronger center. The game continues with, let me just quickly think about this now. I think it was knight bd2. Yeah, knight bd2. And black decides to play d5, attacking this bishop. So the bishop retreats. Now bishop was played to d6. Idea is, when you push this pawn, you are weakening the e5 pawn, and so the e5 pawn is hanging. Therefore, d5 was played with a tempo against the bishop. Bishop has to move, because getting a pawn for a bishop is not really worth it now, is it? And then bishop d6 was played in order to defend this pawn. And he says that the best squares for the bishop are the d6 and c5 squares, because both of these are aiming at the white king side. So in the game we continue with queen to e2, adding more pressure towards this pawn. As there is only one defender, there are now two attackers. Black decides to continue with queen to e7, and white decides to castle on the king side. And this is something that black has been opting for. He wants white to castle on the king side so that he can castle on the queen side. Or, if white were to choose to castle on the queen side, black would have castled on the king side in order to use pawns as the battering rams to open up the king side position, or the castle king side. Sorry, the castle king. Wow. So, after castles, knight bd7. And the knight was played to h4. Now this is a double threat. First of all, it is attacking the undefended bishop. Second of all, it is opening the door for f4 to be played in order to strike at black's center, which has been very nicely built up until this point. Black continues with queen to e6, simply defending this bishop. And if sorry, let's just make this move, which was played in the game, and we'll go back. Now, if new variation, if f4 was played, he said that he would have played h6 in order to force the bishop to capture the knight. So after bishop takes f6, g takes f6, waiting for f takes e6, and then being able to recapture with the pawn here. Obviously this wouldn't work in this specific position because of the bishop hanging. Let me just see if I can remember this variation. Yeah, it starts with bishop to g4, actually, now that I think about it. And so the queen moves, and then comes h6, forcing the capture here. And after this capture, then black has a very nice center, which is nicely supported, and he's building a pawn chain towards the king side. Also, this bishop over here is pretty useless. Right, so back to the game. Didn't I? Yeah, knight takes f5, queen takes f5 was played. And in this position, the bishop here is hanging, and so there are a few alternatives. One of them is to retreat the bishop. However, this is going to make it utterly useless after, so let's just, this was played in the game. Now, if the bishop retreats to this square, new variation, we are simply going to make it utterly useless and start start pushing the pawns over here. And this is going to be rather nice for black, allowing to push the pawns with tempos, and if he ever wants to relieve this bishop, he's going to have to spend several tempi doing so. Also, you don't really want to do this as it weakens this diagonal. In this position, you can obviously block with the bishop, but the point is there regardless. So bishop takes on f6, and Philidor decided to play g takes f6 in order again to strengthen his center. f4 was played, and queen to g6. F takes e5, f takes e5, and in this position, white decided to play rook to f3. And this is a double threat behind this move. One of the ideas is to simply double up the rooks, while the other one is to harass the queen. And in order to avoid this, black decided to play h5, simply giving his queen somewhere to go in the case of rook to g3. White decided to double up the rooks with rook a to f1, and black castled. So let me just quickly see that I've got my moves correct here. Yeah. And in this position, white decided to play c4. Now, c4 has a couple of ideas in mind. Well, there's really only one idea, which is to try to break up white's center, either by capturing and actually winning a pawn, and the other one being to induce d4 to be played, so that the e5 pawn is going to be a weakness and a target, and it's also going to shut out this bishop, which is going to have to find a new way into the game by either of these squares. And so a simple idea, this was played in the game, so after this variation, we could see something like a3 being played, thus not allowing for the bishop to enter the game, even having ideas of pushing here on the queen side and moving the pieces over in order to continue this attack. So let us just get rid of all of this. So in the game, black decided to play e4, and this is a very nice move, actually. First of all, it is a move that comes with a tempo, because it attacks the rook. And this is a pawn sacrifice, indeed. As we can see, the square here is more than sufficiently covered. And sorry, and white did decide to take the pawn, and black gets a very nice and centralized passed d pawn, which has no pawns fighting towards it, and in addition to this, it is a strong potential to protect this pawn in order to allow it to queen rather easily. So in this position, white decided to play bishop to c2. One idea, obviously, is to defend this square, and the other one is that it is opposing or looking at the black queen. And so at some point, after the knight moves, a threat would be e5, coming with a tempo against the queen as well as against the bishop. So that is white's plan with this move. And so in order to not allow this, also I didn't mention that this is an isolated pawn, so it's simply going to be a weakness at the target that black is going to attack, is the idea anyway. Black decided to play knight to e5 with the idea of simply blocking or blockading this pawn. And so this also comes with a tempo against the rook. So rook to f6 was played, gaining a tempo against the queen. Queen goes to g7, and queen comes to f2. This is a move that allows knight to g4, coming with a fork or a double attack against the two. And white decides to get out of this, and he had seen this in advance, obviously, was to play queen to f5 check, and then getting the queen out of the fork, and then get a rook out. And in this position, we can see that black has a very strong threat of simply grabbing here on h2, and then after the king moves, simply having ideas of doubling and then maybe just even sacrificing the rook somehow. Well, here would be better, getting a double attack here. In this position, white decided to play rook takes d6. And this is actually considered to be the strongest move, according to the engines that I have tested this move with, simply because the bishop it's simply too strong. Black responding with rook takes d6, and in this position he plays queen to f4, pinning the rook to the black king. Now, black is up material. He's got quite a few advantages. He's got a very nice passed pawn here in the center. He's got a very nice pawn formation on the queen side. This is a weakness though, so that should be mentioned. But he's up material because he's up the exchange. And therefore, he decides to play queen to e5, forcing the exchange of queens. So, again, as I said, forcing, idea being that if you move the queen away in order to keep the queens on the board, you are getting mated on h2. Notice that the square here is covered by the knight. So this forces the exchange of queens, which is only good for black, because he's up material, and the only real threat to the black position is this queen getting too active. Queen takes e5, knight takes e5 was played. Rook to f5 was played, knight goes back to g4, and then c5 was played, simply gaining a tempo against the rook here. Rook to g6, aligning itself with the king. And in this position, knight to c4 was played, controlling this square, also trying to activate on the queen side. Knight comes to f3, double attack on bishop and knight. Could obviously try to avoid this, but it's going to be painful considering the amount of power that's going to be coming down here. Also, there is an immediate threat of, rook takes e3. So in the event that, for example, knight to a3 was played in order to defend the bishop, we would simply see rook takes on g2 with a check, king moves, and then doubling up, and soon enough going to be delivering checkmate. In the event of the rook coming back to defend, then knight takes, and that's all she wrote. So let's just get rid of the arrows. Basically forcing knight takes on e3 and e takes d3, sorry, e3, d takes e3. Rook comes back to f3, simply to get rid of this pawn because it is a true danger. Rook comes over to d8. Rook takes e3 and rook to d2 marks the end of the game. The reason for this ending the game is that it is attacking the bishop on d2 as well as threatening rook g takes g2. Yeah, threatening rook g takes d2, I believe. And this is simply too much for white to handle. The best way to handle this is obviously to save the bishop. So bishop to b3 could be played. Then rook takes, king moves, and already here we have a checkmate threat with rook to h1. Therefore, the king has to move again. And rook takes b2 would be considered the best move. Simply grabbing another pawn. And let's say, in this position, again there is a checkmate threat here. So let's say in this position that black were to play this. I think that would be the best move. Not even, actually. Yeah, it would be. So rook to f3. And we could say rook to b1 check. Only move would be to block with the bishop. And then a simple rook to h1 check is going to win the bishop at the very least. In the event of rook to f1, then rook takes, king takes, and rook takes d1. King has to move, and we're going to be picking up we're going to be controlling these two pawns rather easily. Rook takes here, and then simply picking up the other pawn, and this pawn can easily be defended by the king. While the rest of the black pawns are queening. So that was the end of this game. I hope you learned something. Please go ahead and leave a like and a comment if there's anything you would like to say to us. You should also remember that you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And so without any further ado, thank you so much for watching and have a very nice day. Cheers, bye.